Welcome everybody to this initial webinar focusing in on an aspect of leading education systems. I'm Dr. Stephen Brown, and for the next hour I'll host some esteemed guests, including yourself, in terms of continuing the discussion around the leadership, system leadership of education systems. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge Emeritus Professor Patrick Duignan, my co-editor and a globally recognised researcher and academic that has a long history with Emerald Publications. And I know that Patrick is online, and I wish to acknowledge the wonderful collaboration, and I'll hear that word later on, I'm sure, in different senses. I also would like to recognise other members of the contributing group, including Phil Billington, one of Australia's leading system leaders and contributors over a long period of time for Catholic Education in Australia, and Prue Horan in the same ilk, who's contributor with Dr. Anne Ryan, another chapter. So let's begin the conversation. In the spirit of the conversation, I'd like to introduce another co-contributor, the wonderful Maggie Farah. Maggie, if you don't know her, well, I don't know where you've been actually. I think globally she is well known, and for all the right reasons. A great friend, a great colleague to many, and somebody who's had a distinguished career and still contributes in all sense of the word. Maggie has co-authored with our guest tonight, contributing Chapter 7 of Leading Education Systems. So Maggie, over to you for the next couple of minutes. Give your reflection about the key thematics, and then over to our wonderful guest. So Maggie Farah, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. It's such a delight to be here in this community, and even the names that you've mentioned of other contributors to the book. You know, I know just what wonderful leaders they are and what a great contribution they've made. So, Stephen, congratulations to you on the book. I think it's incredibly timely, and I'm just absolutely delighted to see it now in publication, and I really believe it'll make a significant contribution to the leadership of just the complex world of leading educational systems. And Stephen, when you conceived of the book, you wanted us all to focus on what our contribution means for what's termed a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And that was before the pandemic hit, and a little did we know just how prophetic you were going to be. So I was really thrilled to be asked to write the chapter on leading a connected and partnership-based system, and how system leadership is the heart of enabling this to work well. And you know, again, if partnerships and networks were important before the pandemic, and I know we always believed they were, they're absolutely essential now, as is system leadership. And the final part of my chapter just looks at that in a little more detail. And I know we've got some people in this webinar from outside England, and I'm sure if you've had a chance to read the chapter, then our system seems very diverse. I mean, some would say it's fragmented, which is true. And one of the reasons why networking and collaboration has become so very important in England is because we have this
So whilst Maggie is capturing our attention by putting a pause in there, I think it's fantastic of yours, Maggie. So this whole notion of partnerships, and Maggie's absolutely correct. There's a lot of work gone on to high-performing systems of schools, and as I've witnessed with Patrick in the book, there has been little research, next to none, of veracity around what is system leadership. So part of that exploration by Maggie and our guest tonight was in and around this notion of what system leadership looks like. So Maggie, I will not do your job, but I'll step in and ask our first contributor to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Helen Rowland, Chief Executive of Focus Trust. I qualified as a primary teacher, teaching children aged from 4 to 11 years in 1990, and spent the first significant chunk of my career working in local authority schools in the borough of Oldham, which is in the northwest of England. And now we have a family of 15 schools with 6,000 children, and we work with all our communities to make a difference to the children, our colleagues and communities. Great to be here, thank you.
Welcome, Helen.
Hello, hello, my name is Nicola Wolfe and it's lovely to be with you today. So I too started my career as a teacher back in 1991 and went on to become a head teacher in Barnet in London. My role now is the Assistant Director of Education in Essex, which is a large local authority in the south of England. We have over 500 schools broken into primary, secondary and special and alternative provisions. And my role across the county is to lead on partnerships and collaborative working and to ensure that none of our schools, whether they're local authority maintained or academies, are isolated, and have partnerships in which to collaborate and to really help work cooperatively in accelerating school improvement across the county.
Thanks, Nicola.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name's Mary-Claire Brotherton. It's brilliant to be with you. So my role is Education Director in a trust in England. And like Nicola and Helen, I was a teacher and a head teacher at one point. And my role at the moment is leading school improvement across a group of 16 schools within our trust called Anthem, but also leading a large alliance of primary schools in Lincolnshire who have chosen to work together to focus on school improvement in a collaboration. It's called Kyra, and we stretch right across Lincolnshire in quite a rural area, focusing on supporting our primary schools with their priorities for children and young people. It's great to be with you. And welcome back, Maggie.
Oh, carry on.
It's like sliding doors, Maggie. Wonderful to see you, Marie-Claire, and acknowledge you once again for the work you do as in system leaders. And what an esteemed panel, led by supported by the wonderful Maggie Farah. Structure for the next couple of moments or the webinar is that we will engage each of the panelists in answering a couple of questions that we've discussed beforehand and caucused. There is a chat option there, obviously, with online learning that if you've got a comment, please pop it into the chat, and Maggie and Kim will moderate those. So I'll probably just be focusing, and I encourage Maggie to interrupt, give me a pause now. And then towards the end, we want to encourage that interaction, that questioning, and then last 5 minutes. In the spirit of being a good broker or referee, I'll be in the background just moving the conversation along. So the first question, interesting one. The first question, what does the term system leadership mean to you, inclusive of our panelists? So we've had a pre-meeting and the winner is Marie-Claire. So over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. So the term system leadership is one that is used in a variety of different contexts to describe a variety of different things. But for me, ultimately, it is something to do with leaders who are skilled and comfortable leading beyond their own organisational boundaries to create permeable organisations for colleagues to look in and to look out. So it's around coalescing around collective purpose, regardless of the structures that we find ourselves in. And ultimately, for me, it's about that focus on the frontline practice and what's happening for our children and young people day in and day out. So that's how I frame it. So, yeah.
So this word enabling, supporting, frontline, where the action is. Helen, is that
Building on what Mary Claire said, it's a term obviously I've heard over the years, but I think currently my understanding of it really resonates with our culture, which we developed in our trust of collective efficacy, based on John Hattie's work, Teacher Efficacy. And a number of years ago, we co-created, it took us a whole day to come up with a definition of what we mean by collective efficacy. And it's a shared commitment to work together on the things that matter to improve outcomes for all. So everybody in our trust, I just say, come on now, our collective efficacy. So we share talent, we share resources, and we do it beyond our schools. So we do it in our local authorities, we do it nationally. We also have learned from Leora Cruddas, who's the Chief Executive of Confederation of Schools Trust, about civic leadership and our responsibility and our moral duty to look beyond our organisation. So that's where it resonates with me, and I'm encouraging all our leaders at all sorts of levels to be a system leader, and our children.
Really, so we've gone from the top of the country, then moving down, and now into Essex. So, yeah. So Nicole and Nicola, sorry.
Yeah, so thank you. So again, I'm building on Mary Claire and Helen's comments there. In terms of the system leadership, to me, in Essex, it's being part of the education system in Essex and bringing all parts of that to get that system together. So in the way that the local authority works with our school leaders, the partnerships, but also our teaching school hubs and our governor association, and bringing all parts of that system together to show that collaboration will accelerate school improvement. And actually the organisations benefit from giving and receiving, and that mutual reciprocity really in terms of being part of partnership working. And I think one of the mantras that I have in Essex is to think about our children and our schools rather than my children and my schools, and really shifting that ethos and culture to thinking about that collective. And actually what I'm doing here, how's that going to affect all of the children in a locality within Essex? We have a partnership strategy across the county, and we have a vision for that all schools have signed up to, and that vision is shared and owned by all across the system. And one of the things, sentences from that, which I'll share with you, which I think exemplifies this for us, is that children and families of school communities will benefit from the strength of schools working in collaboration with each other rather than in isolation, particularly in these challenging times. And for me, I think that embodies what system leadership means from my aspect in my work.
So building on that, Nicola, when we see presenting government policies that really privilege individual school success, and I think it's something in your chapter and other chapters of the book that's really those presenting issues, how you, as the system or authorities or power structures really acknowledge school or system improvement based on individual success, and then the collective efficacy, the collaboration, the partnerships we know are wonderful and appropriate. How do you see that tension playing out? Do you feel that all the time? Or?
I think we certainly try and engage, so where we have meetings with the department or with Ofsted, to explain to them our system in Essex and how we work, and certainly in some of our previous inspection reports, we began to collect those where Ofsted recognised the power of collaboration and really use those as drivers, because Ofsted is obviously a very important part of the system, but where they've recognised that collaboration really has supported school improvement, we've used those as really good examples. So I think communication is the key, and to keep talking to government and Ofsted around what it is we are doing to really support school improvement in collaboration with schools and us as a local authority within that middle tier that Maggie talks about in her chapter.
That's a great segue, I think. Maggie, your work, and which exemplifies this, is a peer reviews and collaboration, and your sense of working with each one of these three wonderful leaders Any comments on what you've heard so far?
Yeah, look, I think they're absolutely right, and I think your question was spot on, Stephen. I mean, this system leadership is courageous work, because Marie Claire, Helen and Nicola are working in the face of a system that preferences the individual school. You're absolutely right. And what I'm seeing and what I've noticed through the years that I've worked with the three leaders here is the adaptive nature of their role, that they're constantly adapting their system leadership role to the growing maturity of networks and partnerships and the growing maturity of school leaders to lead collaboratively, but also to build what I call the partnership gene within their schools. And I think if we are going to shift the system so that the partnership and the network becomes a sort of preordinate unit, and then the individual schools all belong to a partnership and the whole system flips itself, which I believe is where we are going, then the work that my three colleagues here are doing to embed this partnership gene and this sense of belonging to something bigger, not only with the school leaders, but the middle leaders are critical, because they're the leaders of the future. And Helen, you mentioned children, and I know Marie Claire, you've talked about children as well, and the Kyra Kids Council, that if we're growing all the leaders in our schools and the communities to see the partnership as the preordinate thing they belong to, that is going to be bigger and more powerful than the system. And quite frankly, the pandemic has shown that the department, the inspection system wasn't even at the, as we say in England, wasn't even at the races. It's so fragile, it fell apart. But the partnerships took over. So I think we are at a real hinge of history here, Stephen, in many ways. And system leadership and partnerships are absolutely at the fore of it. But it is courageous work, and the three leaders here are demonstrating that over and over again.
So great conversation. So really around related to the next couple of questions, I guess we've taken turns, and I guess any one of the three or four can step into the conversation as you feel free. Do you consider yourself Helen, Marie Claire, Nicola, do you consider yourself a system leader? And be indulgent, and I'm sure I can answer that. Maggie would acknowledge that. But more specifically, I'm really after, what are the core capabilities now? Are you biologists, are you microbiologists setting that gene loose, or they're amoeba growing? What are those things, if you were looking at somebody else coming into a system leader role, what are those core pieces of advice you'd say you need to do this? Over to you.
Okay, well, if I answer this one then first, I think these have definitely been challenged, and we needed these during the pandemic. We've all individually, personally and professionally had some very challenging times this last couple of years. And to me, the core capabilities required in being a system leader are a clear moral purpose. Why am I here? What am I doing every day? Because that was different. We had to learn to work in a very different way. And I never for a minute envisaged when I became a teacher that I would be chairing the COVID committee in my trust, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on a Sunday morning. But that was what was required at the time. So I think it's strength of character. And I've learned, it's Michael Fullan, that I am the weather. I create the climate in our trust and the culture in our trust. And I empower and support and skill, not all myself, I encourage other people to skill up our colleagues to be able to then empower their colleagues to make a difference in their communities, because they're very different. So we've learned over the years, yes, we all want to put children first, and that's why we're here, but we prioritise our colleagues' development, professional development. So we read a book called Putting Staff First by John Tomset and Johnny Utley. I reflected on it. It enabled me to refine our appraisal process. So we have one appraisal objective, which is be great at my job. whether it's me, whether it's a midday supervisor, an HLTA, head teacher, a site manager, that is our objective, be great at my job. And I think relationships are at the heart of it. You know, back in a school yesterday, I'm the same person I was when I worked there in that, well, a little bit different, but 1992. And those relationships are underpinned by values. And I think I've learned that when you're challenged, you've just got to go back to your values, and just, you know, there will be challenge. And sorry, hold people to account if they're not living out the values that are so important in your organisation, because at the end of the day, we can't have people going off in completely different directions. So I think I've also learned to be authentic. You know, I'm on here with people from different parts of the world. I am just me. And but the bigger thing as well is be humble and admit you don't have all the answers. There were lots of times last year I had to ask for help, and that's where our culture of collective efficacy comes in. And another thing I've learned as a capability is about being tough on issues but kind on people. That's something I've talked to Maggie about. You know, you have to think, is it good enough for the children in your organisation? So depersonalise things, and those are things I've really had to hold dear to in this last couple of years, and will do going forward in this VUCA world that we're living in, working in.
Wow. Helen, live out your values is one of your catch cries, I'm sure. So,
If not laminate, Stephen.
yes, very clear on equal.
So in terms of the core capabilities, again, obviously echoing everything that Helen said, and I was sort of looking at my list and going, "Oh, what have I got left?" No, absolutely. But I think that what that shows is that actually those core capabilities of moral purpose, being kind on children, you know, they're so important at all levels of system leadership, and I think the fact that we've, you know, come up with similar is really important. Actually, I think what I would add to that, I think, from my role, is that I see myself as a core capability in terms of facilitation. You know, I really want all of parts of the system within Essex to feel themselves at system level, at system leadership level, at whatever their role is within a school. And I often say to leaders, partnership working can't sit with you. It has to permeate throughout your organisation. And if I walk into your school, will any member of staff say, well, we're in a strong partnership, and I meet up with the teachers in my locality? Will they tell me that? Are there groups that you've set up of different staff across your organisation, and actually partnership is just the way we do things around here? And using those capabilities to solve problems that you can't solve on your own. And I think that's really important, is to think about, you know, why are the partnerships coming together? To solve a problem you can't do on your own. And actually working with leaders and giving some professional development into being a system leader, because it's different to just leading your own school. It requires different capabilities. And I think that working with others and giving professional development to working with peers is something that I see as one of my core capabilities in terms of facilitating that. But also being a strong listener and being open to new ideas, because actually working in a partnership means that you accept you don't have all the answers, and that's where your strength of partnership can come into its own, to be accepting of that collaboration. And I think what's also really important here is having high aspirations for children and young people, because you could be in a partnership with low collective aspirations and just keep turning that round and round. But actually, you need to be in a partnership that has high aspirations, and being able to have that trust to be able to challenge colleagues when those aspirations you feel aren't high enough for your locality and your partnership. So I think that collective focus on high aspirations, but also on problem solving, to co-create the future, and be courageous to do that. And I know that Maggie mentions that as well, but I think one of those core capabilities is being able to look ahead. What can we co-create? What can we do differently? And I think they're really important values. And I see in my role helping to facilitate that, providing tools to be able to help leaders to be able to be the system leaders, to be able to work, as we say, in this volatile world that we're currently in.
Mm.
So, Nicola, I'm sure you're winning hearts and minds, of course. Murray, Claire, building on that, extending.
Yeah, I mean, that's brilliant. I think the couple of things that I would have add to that would be, you talked about problem, and Nicola talked about problem solving, and I think that's absolutely critical to it. It's that what I would call collective puzzling together. How do we do this together better? How do we collectively navigate the territory? I think what I've learned, particularly in the last 2 years with the pandemic, is the importance of being the storyteller in the context that you give. You help other people interpret the prevailing context that we find ourselves in. You give a narrative to the why, a narrative to the moral purpose, and that you bring with it a sense of helping other people find their place in that story, what that contribution is that colleagues make within the system and within their own context. And I guess the only kind of other capability, I think, is, well, there's probably a couple, but being able to live with and be comfortable with the complexity and the ambiguity of it. It's not straightforward. It's not just one line of accountability. It's ambiguous, and you have to be able to be comfortable with the fact that you, A, don't have all the answers, and B, don't control everything. So you have to be able to manage that tension. And I suppose the final thing would be, you mentioned listening, and I think that's really critical, Nicola, but it's that being really attuned to and skilled at bridging interests and even professional boundaries in terms of beyond education, you know, the contribution that health and social care and business and the wider sector makes to our kind of role with children and young people, and being able to kind of, there's a great phrase in a book I read, and I've stolen it, and it says being a mutually trusted linchpin, and I just love that. Being a mutually trusted linchpin in the system, I think, is the heart of system leadership for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maggie, I hear many of your phrases, your influencing coming in the commentary. What a powerful play in front of you.
Yeah.
What are you practicing deep listening about? What are you hearing now? What are you sensing?
Oh, well, I'm hearing a real frustration with the status quo. I'm hearing from school leaders, we will not go back to 2019. The system has cracked wide open. I often talk, Stephen, about if COVID has been called the great disruptor, how do we make sure the post-COVID period is not the greatest disappointment? Because the tug of old ways of working, old systems and processes was so strong. You know, schools are very, very habit forming places. They run on a timetable. So it's quite hard to break habitual ways of thinking about the system and about our role and habitual ways of working. But I am hearing a real restlessness, indeed an anger at any sense that we're going back to 2019 because we're not and we won't. And I do think that a lot of what we've heard from Nicola, Marie Claire and Helen just there is really about how do we garner ourselves, how do we resource ourselves. So this is as well as courageous, it's very pioneering work. And I talk in the book about it's like walking Striding Edge. Helen will know Striding Edge, and those from the north, many will, in the Lake District. It's a very narrow path, but with a great vista that opens out around you. And walking that is not easy. Reading the landscape, knowing when to look down at your feet, knowing when to look wider. And I think where we're moving to and what I'm deeply listening to, and Nicola, this was always a challenge that we talked about in Essex because you have so many schools. We can no longer be beguiled by hierarchy. If we can't get all the senior leaders involved in the partnerships, let's talk to the middle leaders, let's talk to the children, let's talk to the parents. We have to give up power and control. I think me, Marie Claire and Helen mentioned that. And there's a fear around that. You know, we have to ask ourselves, what degree of risk are we prepared to live with as we shift the system to a partnership-based system where almost everyone is a system leader. And that means redefining the role of system leaders. I mean, there's a huge opportunity here, Stephen, and I'm hearing that we're ready for it, but we're a little bit afraid of it. Were we born for this time? It's a bit like Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. I wish the ring had never been given to me. And Gandalf says, well, so do everyone. So does everyone who lives in this time. But that is not for us to decide. What is for us to decide is what we do with the ring. And that's what I'm hearing. Can we grasp it? I think we can, but I'm not sure.
Wow. Helen, Marie-Claire, Nicola, any resonance with any of that conversation? It's something firing away saying, this has really made it clear for me. I'd like to add to that.
I think it's going back to your point earlier, Maggie, about courageous leadership. And I think courageous leadership, you can stride out on your own, but I think that's foolish leadership, really. I've been courageous in my leadership because I've been supported by a great team of people who I know I am speaking on behalf of, but I know that when the going gets tough, they'll be there for me. So I think that's, you know, that's where we've got to remind ourselves. But yes, I think we are ready for this world, and we're demonstrating that we are, but supported by our teams. But my team is so much wider now. My team is not just Focus Trust. My team is other CEOs, other, you know, like Marie-Claire, other education directors. It's people in the local authority. It's authors I didn't even know. I mean, I've got to give credit to Damien Corbett, who introduced me to a book called Being the Social CEO. And I thought it was about being a sociable one before I read it. And it's not. It's about using social media to tell your story. So I was never on Twitter personally, because I'm really against, I was against social media as a head teacher, because I could see the harm. But I think if you use Twitter in a positive way, I've made so many connections on there. That's my team now, you know, that we connect with and we can share. There might be some people on the call. I'm now in a CEO Action Learning group from people I've met on there. So courageous leadership comes from asking for help from other people and going forward together, I think, with strength. And reminding yourself of your moral purpose. We're all here, they're all our children, nationally, internationally, aren't they? We want to do the very best for them.
Absolutely. Any connection, Maggie, or Marie-Claire or Nicola, any sense of?
I think I'd just like to comment on kind of what Maggie said about the frustration that there is in the system. And I do get a sense from the leaders that I talk to that what the last 18 months has taught us, and it was never in doubt, but there's something like going through this together that's really reminded us that we do really need each other, and that actually nobody can do this job on their own. So the multiple layers of networking between pupils, staff, leaders, you know, CEOs, education directors. It's that lovely phrase that Margaret Wheatley has in the title of her book, you know, we turn to one another. We turn to one another. And really what we turned for was hope. We turned for connection. We turned for really practical things, resources. Have you got one of these? Have you come across this? What do you do? How are you feeling? And actually, for me, within the Kyra partnership particularly, our DNA, you talked about the collaboration gene, Maggie, in our partnership, we talk about the Kyra DNA. The DNA bore fruit, you know, it's not just rhetoric, it's not just niceties, it's not just cups of coffee and, you know, cheering each other up. It was really robust support, challenge and connection at a time when I think our schools would have, our leaders would definitely say that they would have fallen over if it wasn't for the relationships that they had. And so I think there is a rising up in the system that's now saying, hang on a minute, this fragmentation is not fit for purpose. We need strong connected groups of schools. I'm not bothered about the governance structure bit of it. I'm not bothered about that bit. I'm bothered about the school to school connectivity and our ability to work beyond our own schools and into the wider community to meet the needs of our kids and young people. So I agree with you, Maggie. That's what I feel. I'm anxious for that next evolution of actually seeing how that translates over the next 10 years.
Well, I think we're on the edge of that conversation bit we're going to have around the centrality of collaboration as a partnership of and part of that VUCA world, which then would lead on to the related question. with sitting where you are and 10 years hence or 5 years hence, what are those big issues? You know, those issues that you see on in front of you, perhaps emerging on the hill or just teetering over that horizon. Is there something that really, from your particular as stewards of the current system and responsible stewards who are going to leave a legacy, what do you see?
Shall I kick off with that one? So, sort of building really from what Marie Claire said there as well, in terms of how partnerships and collaborations have become stronger throughout the pandemic. We've certainly seen that in Essex as well, and I think that strength will lead us to help with those key challenges that we go on to face coming out of the pandemic. And it has been great to see how the partnerships and collaborations, you know, have become stronger over the last 18 months, and now we'll use that strength to help look at solutions to some of the key challenges that we are facing. And I think one of the key challenges that we are facing here is the recruitment and retention of staff. And I feel that if staff feel they're in a strong collaboration with strong networks of support, then the next job may look more attractive, because actually what they don't want to see is an isolated leader who has to come up with all the answers themselves, that has to be on their own at night thinking about what am I going to do about this. But if they can see their leaders part of strong networks of collaboration, I really think that will help with recruitment and retention, because we are heading for a crisis, there is no doubt, with the amount of people leaving the profession. But I think if we can show how those networks and systems can really support and develop talent early, you know, let's do talent spotting within our collaborations and our organisations, and provide opportunities across those, so actually people can practice being the next step up, if you like, before taking the leap, so that when they take their leap they feel much more confident about it. So I feel the strength of the collaboration coming out of the pandemic will help things like recruitment and retention. I also think it will help in terms of that accountability system, because that's also what makes the next stage scary for people, is that accountability. And if within the collaboration and partnership we are holding people to account in a trusting, constructive and positive way, that seems a little bit less scary. And I know that Maggie mentions as well around how important peer review is. Well, the more external people you have coming into your school in that collaborative, constructive way also helps with accountability, because those trusting relationships will enable you to sort of share those parts of your school which are difficult to solve, and actually being part of a collaboration will make it easier to solve. So I do feel that the strength of collaborations and partnerships that have coming out of the pandemic will help with those issues. And I also think as well, in terms of, I think budget will always be an issue as well. But again, those economies of scale of working together to problem solve and looking at ways that you can be creative around resource, people as well as financial, will also be something that is a real positive of that collaborative working that we're seeing as a real strength. And, you know, I'm sure that we won't lose the strength that's coming out of the pandemic, because people can see those positives of working together.
Absolutely insightful. James Molino, the Education Minister of Victoria, says out of COVID, let's mine the gold, and we'll pan for that gold. So that is gold. Helen or Marie Claire, what do you see?
No, I recognise very similar challenges, and there are strategic priorities in our trust. And the only one I'd add, because I had all those, Nicola, the only one I'd add is balancing, and this is where I think we've got the power of our voice now to stand up and say that our children and our colleagues' social, emotional and mental health is as important as their academic achievements, because we have seen how adversely affected, and it's only in some cases becoming evident now. You know, we thought it was over and done with, didn't we? Let's be honest, in June 20, you know, we're a long way through to get through this, and it's having the confidence to say, actually, the well-being of our children and colleagues is more important actually than their academic achievements. And I think that gives our head teachers and teachers power, because we're there as a trust and organisation saying that with them. We're also saying it widely. So they've got to be in a mentally and emotionally and physically good enough state to be able to access their learning. So it's putting funding, people, resources into supporting children to make sure they're ready to learn, and that's very different, you know. And Nicola, and you've worked extensively with Mark Rowland, haven't you? No relation to me. And you know, we really value his work. We looked at it last year with our teaching learning strategy, and how can we get it right for all our children? It's not a label, they've got needs, and those needs differ, so let's find out what their needs are and how we can meet them. And children's needs vary all the time, but recognise also our staff are also facing many personal challenges, and how can we support them as well.
It's so very
sorry, we've come up, sorry Stephen, we've come up with our own measures of accountability in our trust. So I hope if there's anybody from Ofsted on the call, well, with the greatest of respect, we are, you know, our vision is to create great schools at the heart of our communities, and it's that we've not got the word outstanding in it, we've not got the word good in it, we don't go with Ofsted judgments. It's about how do we define greatness, and that's what's important to us. And I'll stand alongside any of our head teachers and leaders any day and defend what we're doing.
So beforehand we might have been nervous about interchanging. I think we've actually this dialogue very quickly. It's very exciting. Marie-Claire, your insight.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Nicola and Helen have identified as well, and I think all of that, if you like, is absolutely foundational to the future success of the education system, and indeed our nations, is having our children and young people well prepared for their very uncertain future. Let's be frank. I think the biggest challenge that we face as an education community globally is how do we connect with one another, because our global issues, pandemic being one of them, climate change being another, our global issues are the things that our children and young people need to be able to be skilled to tackle. And in being skilled to tackle those issues, I fundamentally believe is about their ability to connect with one another, to communicate, to be able to have some hope in the midst of that they've got a contribution to make to the future, and that there is a future worth pursuing. So there's something about creating hopeful learners and creating hopeful systems that don't shy away from tackling some of these big things, and knowing that they need to be active in that. So I think, as you've said, Nicola, getting teachers and leaders into the profession who are up for that challenge to create great teaching and learning, as you've said, Helen, that mental health and well-being and that sense of their own self-esteem and confidence are absolutely foundational. But in a way, that's to solve the problems of the global issues I think that we're all facing, as we feel like a much smaller globe now, don't we, than we did pre-pandemic, because we've all faced these same things together, and it's not been an equal playing field, and there's justice issues in that as well we have to grapple with. So that, I mean, I think that's where I think our biggest challenge is. And the reason this webinar is so exciting, I think, is because it's beginning to bring system thinkers together to say, do you know what, we all need to think bigger than our own system. We need to think as a global system.
Wow. Maggie, I'm stunning insights. Maggie, what are you listening to?
Well, look, just hearing Nicola, Marie-Claire and Helen talk and seeing the faces, and I'm sorry we can't see everybody who's listening, but I think have really demonstrated that by sharing challenges for which we do not have answers is very energizing. It's what brings people to the table. And really feeling from all three of you that, you know, these challenges, the networking, partnership and growing excellent system leaders is the way we're going to move towards a solution. I have a real worry though that gnaws at me whenever we have these conversations, because I have a sense that as governments around the world begin to see partnerships and networking as an essential part of building a new education system, the heavy hand of bureaucracy will come down on it. The empowering culture that's been built by schools and by, you know, colleagues here on in the webinar that brings people to the work, the relationships, the collective efficacy that Helen talked about could be lost. And I haven't really quite worked out for myself how the top of the system, if I can say that, you know, the government, regions and so on, with the role that they have, and the fact that they will begin to see this as a good idea. At the moment, as Steve Mumby says, it's voluntary. It must be voluntary, but it will become inevitable. It cannot become inevitable by becoming part of government policy and being mandated. It cannot. And I really think a lot about how we're going to work this out in dialogue. And Helen's got a hand up. I suggest she's got a really important response.
I just think we've got a duty. You know, we had a trust review meeting with the DFE just before October half term, and I think we've got a duty to talk about the difference that we are making in our organisations and beyond, and let them know that we are making a difference, because you know, they just still want to talk about COVID, and they're taking attendance, things like this every day. We've actually, like Mary Claire said, we tried to look forward in the pandemic with hope every day. We were being challenged, battered. It's like, no, let's keep looking forward with hope. And we prioritise curriculum, we prioritise teaching and learning, because that's what our children need, that's what our colleagues need. So I think we just need to keep telling the people out there that this is what we're doing collectively, this is the difference it's making, and welcome them in when they come. And that's what saddens me, when head teachers don't want to get involved in peer review. You know, I'm trying to bring peer review to the borough of Oldham, and some people don't want to get involved because they need to get ready for Ofsted. Well, actually, peer review, the school partnership programme, has empowered our leaders, like Nicola said, to speak to external audiences who have come in, and, you know, subject leaders, they need development in how to speak to an external audience about what they're doing as a leader. So I can only recommend that people do get involved in peer review and just keep talking about it.
Yeah. So Stephen, just picking that up, and then I know the others want to talk. Can we start to have the conversation with government around, this is the role we need you to play? What is the role that only government can play? And if they don't play it well, what we've been talking about here in terms of ways of working won't flourish. And what is the role we do not want or need them to play? And I do think we need to have that conversation, so it happens at multiple levels.
Well, this is an iterative conversation, but I want to grab onto it and hold that, because out of this webinar is a whole series of things I want to engage people around, including people around the screen. We're about the last 10 or 12 minutes, but I'm sure our colleagues out there listening in have wisdom and comments and questions. So we might pause. If there's too long a pause, we'll assume there's nobody there, or we've actually just wowed them, inspired them and all of that. I'm sure that's the case. So Kim, any questions? Are you monitoring the chat box, or comments, or any comments from people online?
Hey guys, yeah, thank you for, I think we're all just enthralled by the discussion. We have just had one question. I feel like we have kind of, it has kind of been talked through as we've been going, particularly over the last 10 minutes or so. But the question that kind of came through was, when we think and talk about educational leadership, how it often lacks there's no one definition for it. So how can we really approach it? How can we think about improving it, particularly in crisis situations like you guys have all talked about through what we've been going through in the pandemic, but perhaps thinking kind of more broadly for a kind of framework of working within crisis. That the questioner gives a particular context of Afghanistan, which I think is probably quite a big question to unpack in 9 minutes. But if there's things that we can think, or that we can think about as educational leaders, for a kind of framework for how to act in, or how to respond in times of crisis.
Thanks, Kim. Any reactions or comments on that particular plan?
I think one of my comments on that, and Maggie, you might want to build on this, is that there's something about what can be kind of mandated from top to bottom around, this is how you should behave, and, you know, in a time of crisis, this is what leadership should look like, in a very transactional task list structural approach to connection. So I think, and there is an element of that, but I think what I think we're getting at today is that there is something in the substance of who we are as people that we bring to whatever role we're in, whether it be class teacher, head teacher, authority leader, CEO, whatever, that it's something to do with the character that we have within ourselves, which knows that we need other people, we ask for help, we reach beyond, we're better together, there's hope for the future, and together we collectively approach whatever that challenge is. And I don't think that's something that is very easy to teach. You know, you're not going to go on a professional qualification and get a certificate that says you can now do those things, which is why I think it has to be in the DNA of everything that we do. And it goes back to Helen's mantra on that collective efficacy. It's how do you get every single member of your educational community seeing that when you work in education, this is just the way we are. This is what teachers do. Unfortunately, the system doesn't help, because we put teachers in a classroom and we close the door and we say, here are your 30 children, go do it on your own. So right from teacher training, we're ingrained into slight silo mentality. So how do we create a sense that we are no longer prepared to work in silos? We are educators and we work in collaboration. So it's not as easy to mandate, I think, as it is to live and breathe.
Totally agree, Mary Claire, and I think it's, you know, we can do what we can with our children from the very youngest. So we talk to our 7-year-olds and upwards every half term on Zoom assemblies, which we can do now, and we're talking about our culture of collective efficacy. So we talk to everybody about this is the difference you can make together. So, you know, we've just recently done one on climate change and said, you know, one small action you take added to the small action your friend and your class will take and everybody in your school will make an enormous difference. So as well as every child doing that, we've also got a pupil parliament who are really, you know, trying to work with local MPs. And I think if we can build that in the DNA of our children from a very young age, then hopefully they'll be these great educators of the future, what politicians, you know, scientists, whatever they'll be. We've just got to give them that, the skills and the ambition, haven't we, to make a difference.
And I think in the same way that you talk about your children there, we talk about, you know, when leaders come into the council or teachers come into the local authority, about how we talk about the partnership and network they're in and how they're going to be supported within that. So right from, you know, when they're student teachers within schools to say, so where are your other teachers? Let's get a network of you together. So we build that up from a really, you know, from the start of their profession. Because as you say, Mary Claire, they go into their classroom and they're on their own. But what collaboration has enabled that to be really successful while they're in the classroom, they're on their own. They might be delivering it on their own, but they've collectively decided what it is they're going to deliver. And I think that that's really important. And so part of our role, or my role in the council, is to make sure that we've got those networks going. And where have we got isolated schools or leaders or teachers, and how can we bring those and be a broker of that? So I see that as our role as well in the local authority. How can we come out to leaders and say, you know, I think we've got a bit of an isolated situation here, can you help? And, you know, 9 times out of 10 the leaders will say yes, you know, we don't want anyone to be isolated in our system. So I think that brokerage of that from my role is really important. And what we're seeing, and what I'm seeing, is that head teacher wellbeing is being really supported by being in a collaborative system, because head teacher wellbeing over the last 18 months, I mean, it was always something we should focus on, but particularly over the last 18 months and coming out of it now, how do we really support head teachers wellbeing? And I think those collaborative networks are key to that.
So I think equally, early career teachers, it's saddened me already that early career teachers are leaving. You know, they've done it for 2 months in a very challenging time. So it's how can we support them to be as successful as possible beyond the first 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you know. So yeah, we've got a huge joint task to do, haven't we, to support and encourage them.
Great. So we've got 5 minutes, 5 wonderful minutes. First 7 I teach leaders. So think about what's your one message you want our people to be listening to about system leadership, one reflection, and then, yeah, over to anybody, and then I'll wrap up. This wonderful, it's impossible to wrap up, but I'll conclude. So over to our panel.
Stephen, can I just pick up on the question, because I think it is my probably final reflection around definitions and frameworks. And it seems comic now that, you know, we have head teacher standards and inspection and review frameworks that are reviewed every 5 years. Well, the world remakes itself within 5 years. So for me, the message is be bold, be brave. Yes, use frameworks and standards, and they're important. They keep us safe, but they're nowhere sufficient. They leave us completely incomplete regarding the roles that we now need to play. So use them as an embarkation point, but go so much further. Be bold, be brave, connect globally and locally, and create your own future.
Well, sounds like a bit like you, Helen. Care, dare, etc.
Yeah, fair share. No, it's almost like the opening line of a song there, Maggie. But mine would be courageous, be authentic, and be you. And you know, if anybody ever needs any help, we're here for you. But we equally will need help as well. So yeah, let's just remember we're all part of a much bigger team of people, aren't we, as educators?
Wow.
And I think for me, it's just remember you can be stronger together. You're not expected to have all of the answers. You can't have all of the answers. And actually being solution focused in a collaboration with peers and colleagues will make you stronger. And actually by not being in a collaboration actually does your communities an injustice in a way, because you're losing the richness that comes with being part of a collaboration. So for me is, if you're not in a collaboration, go and find one.
Nice. Marie-Claire.
Nearly a hashtag there, Nicola, I think. Yeah, for me, it's about showing up with hope. I think that's what I think our teachers need us to do for them at the minute, and our heads need us to do, and our children need us to show up with hope. And I think that means being really present, being present inside your organisation and beyond, but somehow in the midst of that being the person that turns the conversation to possibility, rather than being stuck in the woe is me, the system is so hard, it's so broken, it's really painful, and all of that. I think we have to just show up with hope that there is a better future worth pursuing. So that's where I land.
Nice. My 1 minute, a couple of disparate things, but noting every one of you introduced yourself first or second thing as a teacher. And that was really core to me. And everything else that you talked about was about love for assisting, supporting, making a difference. Really, we can't corporatise, but the art and science of teaching and education needs to continue to be there. And that needs to be ongoing. We can't take the heart out of education. It's what really resonated with me. You're putting the heart where it needs to be. In people, the people who influence, life chances. I love what Marie-Claire said, and you know, the first class, I call them storytellers. The holder of the narrative for the next generation, both the kids, teachers, etc. Maggie and I have talked about the opportunity to lead globally. What I'm thinking about is something around system leadership, which I want to share at a later date. So, leave, I guess, Fullan's quote, many of his quotes, but one of the things we know, isolation is the enemy of improvement. And I think that's the core of partnerships, that's the core collaborative practice. Many of the dispositions that you exchange were about people stuff, about authority used in a mature sense. I only heard one reference to Ofsted. Lovely. Helen, Marie-Claire, Nicola and Maggie and the wonderful team at Emerald, thank you so much for participating in what I hope is generatively the start of many other conversations and the lighting of fires around we need to be the change we want to see, and I'm sure you are just phenomenal in what you're doing. So thank you for the conversation. I'm very humbled to be a part of it, so thank you.